Hi, my name is Murphy Griffin, and welcome to episode 22 of Neophyte Boatwrights. In this episode, I'm going to be going over the fabrication and installation of the Breasthook in my Newfoundland Trap Skiff. So let's get to it. So as I said in the preamble, this episode's all about the making of the Breasthook, so that prompts the question, what is the Breasthook? The Breasthook is a sort of bracket, a triangle-shaped bracket, roughly speaking, that goes at the very bow of the boat at the sheer level. In addition to providing structure, the Breasthook is also a kind of focal point for the boat. So people often use different species of wood that will look really good and pop. I'm going to be making my Breasthook out of walnut, and while black walnut isn't a common species seen on boats, it's a domestic hardwood that is highly rot resistant, so perfectly adequate for applications in boats. Now, one sculptural feature to the Breasthook that some people opt for and some people don't is to camber the Breasthook. Cambering the Breasthook is shaping it in such a way that it has a crown that will easily shed water. I have to admit that shaping the camber into this Breasthook was quite a daunting task to even conceive of, let alone execute. And because it was so involved and I had to do some technical things to lay out the camber, I'm going to do a special little side episode all about the theory behind cambering the Breasthook and how I laid it out. So with that said, let's get to the Breasthook. Okay, first things first, I had to flatten the slab of walnut because it was far too wide to fit in my planer, and this was a big awkward piece anyways, and I didn't want any tear out. So I decided to do it all by hand. You can see this walnut crotch has a lot of figure in it, and that makes this piece extra challenging to work up throughout this video. So do bear that in mind that I'm fighting a very tough piece of wood. So meanwhile, I needed to whip up a pattern for the Breasthook. Here you can see I'm using some thin plywood and hot gluing some extra pieces on there that will capture what I'm calling the ears of the Breasthook, and it also helps register the pattern before I copy down the lines. So with the hot glue set, I know the pattern isn't going to shift around as I'm tracing onto it. And so now I can pick up the general shape or outline of the Breasthook. You can see it faintly here amongst all the other scribblings, a big triangle. I carefully positioned the pattern onto the slab of walnut in order to get the best symmetry. Then it's to the bandsaw to rough it out. You may be wondering why I'm using such a thick piece of walnut. And that's so I have enough room in the piece to work up the camber. When cambering the Breasthook, you're basically sculpting it from above and below, so you need a lot of material to make room for all that shape. I also want to make sure I'm staying well clear of any sapwood. I'm really trying to get the prime cut out of this walnut crotch. But don't worry about waste, I definitely added these big offcuts of walnut to my ever-growing wood hoard. With the piece roughed out, my first objective is to cut the joint where the Breasthook will fit around the stem. Once this joint is fit, it will serve as a fixed reference for the layout and shaping of the rest of the breast hook. So here I'm boring out a lot of the excess material for where the notch will be cut. The bulk of the material is then cut out at the bandsaw. Fair warning, there is a lot of handwork in this episode, but having a real love for hand tools, this is often my first recourse. So here I'm using a coping saw to cut out a little bit more of the excess in the corners where the notch will be chopped. Removing these corner pieces with chisels I have found to be very time consuming and laborious, and so it's worth it to take the time just to cut them out. I then sharply define the perimeter of the notch using chisels before I go in there and start blasting out some of the material. Although blasting out may be a little bit heavy-handed, this walnut is really tough to chop and work up. It's what I imagine trying to chop into a burl would be like. The grain is changing directions and it's just really dense. Once I had squared up and cleaned up the notch, I then had to cut a bevel into the back edge of it so that it could fit snugly against the stem. This is due to the stem having a significant amount of curve in it at the joint. So here I'm using a handsaw to cut the edges of the bevel. I'm being careful to keep the blade registered against the sides of the notch. With the sides sawn in, I could start chiseling in the bevel. Yet again, this is really tough walnut, so I'm making very slow progress in chopping this out. I left a little extra meat on the piece so I have extra material to clamp to, but at this point it made sense to saw out the main sweep of the breast hook. Now began the long and painstaking process of fitting the breast hook into the boat. As per usual with boat joinery, the bevels along the edges of the breast hook are rolling bevels. One of the techniques I used to help me fine-tune the fit of the breast hook was a technique I learned from luthiers and gunsmiths. So here I'm coating the joint with a white powder that when I seat the breast hook in its location will transfer to the high points on the edges of the breast hook. I then took the breast hook back to the bench and planed off all the high spots. I repeated this process innumerable times, trying to get the breast hook fit just right. Because you're continually shaving down both sides of the breast hook, you have to be very careful that you don't take off too much material. There really isn't a whole lot of wiggle room with this process. Once the breast hook fit was tuned in, I could turn to cambering it. So here you can see the layout lines for the camber development. As I said in the intro, this process got pretty complicated, so I'm doing a separate video on cambering. What you may be able to pick up is that each line is at a certain depth. So along each line, I cut a kerf to a set depth. The kerfs are cut symmetrically about the center line of the breast hook. These kerfs will help me monitor the depth of my cuts as I start to shape out the camber in the breast hook. Similar ideas are used all over woodworking. So here you can see how the depth of each kerf corresponds to the camber. Now, everyone will do this differently, but personally I like to start by defining the outline of the shape first on the ends. I do this very carefully with a chisel. This way, when I'm shaping out the rest of the piece, I won't run the risk of having a big blowout on the ends. As I've already mentioned, this piece of walnut is incredibly tough to work up. Believe me, my gouges are very sharp, but I'm basically working up a walnut burl, and so it's this slow and easy progress. So you can see how I'm using the kerf lines to help me gauge the depth of my cuts. Once the kerf lines start to disappear, I know I've gone deep enough. With the workpiece mostly worked up to its final shape, I come back in with violin planes to start smoothing it out. In order to get the appropriate visual effect, I not only have to camber the top, but I also have to shape out the bottom of the breast hook. So I proceed just as I did with the top. I draw in layout lines and kerf down to the requisite depth. So there was a lot of material to remove from the bottom, but one advantage is that the bottom won't actually be seen, so I just need to get the visual effect of the shaping of the bottom of the breast hook. Nevertheless, it was still a lot of work. I intentionally left the edges high so that I could shape them down to the boat. But here I'm just roughing out the material. One thing you'll notice is that now that I'm working on straight grain, the wood works up a lot easier. One of the things I've learned about hand tool woodworking in general and boat building in particular is that the more that I can work a piece in situ, the better the fit will be. So here I've clamped the breast hook in place and I'm starting to shape down the sides so that they're flush with the shear plank. With the vast majority of the shaping of the breast hook done, I can now cut the notches for where the end wales will join with the breast hook. I have to make sure that the remaining piece of the breast hook where the end wale will join is of the same thickness as the frames. One important trick for the joints for the end wales is to make sure that you don't actually cut them to a perfect 90-degree angle. You want the front edge to be perpendicular to the center line of the boat, but not perpendicular to the shear plank of the boat. This ultimately makes the installation of the end wale a lot easier because it can sort of slide into place like a wedge. One of the other things I've done when cutting this notch is to make sure that the amount of material left in the breast hook is a little bit bigger than the actual thickness of the end wales. This way, after installation of the end wales, I can finish tweaking the shape of the breast hook so that you get a really smooth transition. Yet again, you'll always get a better fit and a better finish if you can shape things in situ. Finally, with the notches cut and the breast hook shaped, I could drill the holes for mounting the breast hook. I'm using silicon bronze screws to mount the breast hook, so I have to countersink the hole. One of the trickier aspects of mounting the breast hook is to make sure that the screws are not going to project out too far. Since I'm mounting it to the shear plank, which is only 1/2 inch thick, I have to make sure that I get the best bite I can in the plank without sticking through it. So at long last, I can finally mount the breast hook. I'm bedding it with polysulfide bedding compound, which makes it a little slippery to get in, and then mounting it with silicon bronze screws. When screwing into oak, I definitely think it's necessary to drill a pilot hole. That way you'll have an easier time installing the screw, and it will prevent you from buggering up the soft silicon bronze. I then added an additional screw on each side from the outboard. And with that, the breast hook was finally installed. Okay, so that's it for episode 22. I really hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for a special neophyte bite about all the theory that went into cambering the breast hook. And if you haven't already, please like this episode, subscribe to my channel, and if you feel so inclined, please consider becoming a patron on my Patreon. And so that's it. Until next time, bye.
Ow.